Today I'm going to be showing you something extremely cool that I learned how to do using Markdown, HTML, and CSS. So what you see here is the Ghostwriter Markdown editor. And you can see that when the text is in the right format, we have a header here that says chess start position. We have some paragraphs I've written further down here, and we have a table here. And on the left side here where I'm at, you see the plain text form. It's a bunch of pipes and dashes here and other things representing a very crude text-based representation of a chessboard. Now on the right side, you see that it sort of has a grid around it. It sort of tries to turn it into a table like you might see on a website, but I have no control over the formatting of it. And you can see that I can jump around to different parts of this document based on the headers here. So I'm having the very start of a very small chess position database written in plain text with Markdown. But there's so much more that can be done here. So what I'm going to show you now is I'm going to go over here. I'm going to open a terminal, and I'm going to make sure we make this full screen here. I'm going to type make. And when I type make, here's what it does. It runs a series of commands because I wrote a makefile that does all of this. So first it uses pandoc here. It uses pandoc to create the main body of all the positions and the tables. And then the next line, it creates the doc type declaration at the beginning of a document here and sends it to a new file named chessbase.html. Then it echoes the opening HTML tag here. Then it copies the contents of an entire file that I wrote containing the head of the HTML document and appends that to that file. Then it prints the opening body tag to that file. Then it copies the body HTML, which is created by pandoc from the Markdown, and finally it closes the end of the body there. And technically, oh, I forgot to do the closing HTML tag. Yeah, I forgot to do the closing HTML tag. I will correct that, don't worry. But first, let's see how it turned out. So first of all, let's look at body.html here. This is what it looks like default, straight from pandoc when it converts the Markdown file you saw earlier into HTML. It sort of creates a table, but there's no borders, there's no formatting, it's really weird looking. But if we open up chessbase.html, now look at it. Now we see the header, but then we see these large characters. We have perfectly square cells of the table here. We have very large text here, single characters representing chess pieces. White pieces are represented by capital letters. Black pieces are represented by lowercase letters. Because each piece has a single letter that can represent that type of piece, it works. And you see the chess notation. So we see the files here, A through H, and we see the ranks 1 through 8 here. And this top left is not important there. It's just meant for everything to be aligned there. So that has to be empty. So you see that all the positions that were covered in the original Markdown file as plain text have now been styled in this incredible way. So let's view the source of this document in the browser here. You will see that we have the opening HTML, we have everything, we have all of these tables automatically generated by pandoc. It's kind of a long document. It has my paragraphs I've written about those positions. And then finally at the end, we have a closing body tag, but we don't have a closing HTML tag. So that's a bug that I need to fix here. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to open the make file. I'm just going to open this in Notepad++ because it works. And what we have to do here, you see, is we simply have to, here's what we're going to do. we have the closing body tag. Let's copy and paste that line. We're going to put that down here. We need to make sure we start this with a tab here. It has to be lined up with tabs as a block. That's the rule of new make. If you don't know what a make file is, don't worry about that. Basically, this runs as like a batch file in a way, the way I have it configured here. So now we're going to change this from body to HTML. So now we're going to save that make file. And now the way it should work is if we go back to our terminal here and type make, now it's going to run all of those series of commands and it's going to remake the file here. Now everything looks identical from the user perspective, but now if we go and view source, we're going to see the opening HTML tag as well as the closing HTML tag is there. And also, one thing you may notice here is that the style here determines the border definitions of the table, the width and height of each cell. Actually, I'm not sure. That's weird. Okay, I think I was defining those all there, but it works, so I'm not going to mess with it. I later defined the table itself to be 720 by 720. Now, here's where it gets interesting, is all of that, contents of that file, all came from Chase-based table head. So this is a file that I wrote. It contains all the contents of the head section of the HTML document. So it's very strange how this works. Now, keep in mind, because even though this document was generated with my series of commands there, we can open chasebase.html and we can modify things. So let's say, what if I temporarily remove this part here, the table CSS definition here? Then let's go back to the browser here. Yeah, okay. So now let's reload this page. Now notice that they're not perfect square anymore. That's because it only made the cells large enough to actually fit the the actual letters there, but it didn't make them a perfect size. So what we have to do is we have to make sure the table is exactly 720. I use that number a lot. There's mathematical reasons why I use that number, but basically we need a perfect square, and 720 is a highly divisible number. So that's the thing. Now, here's what we can do. What if we remove the width and height definition here from this section? Then what happens? Well, now the squares don't quite look right. Some of them are bigger than others. It just is not right. It's not right at all. Yeah, so that's a bit weird. Now, what happens if we remove the border collapse property here instead? Then you see all these little extra things here. And even though it's still pretty cool, it's just not the way I want it to look here. So let's put that back and see what it looks like. There we go. Now it looks right again. Now, if we remove the border 1 pixel solid black, see what it does. Now it doesn't have borders at all. That one little line defines so much data there for the table. So we want to put that back here. And so it's a 1 pixel. But what if we change it to 2 pixels? I did not mean to type Q there. Okay, so 2 pixels. Let's make it thicker. Okay, what if we make it 20 pixels of a border? Let's see what happens. Okay, now that's really weird looking. That doesn't look right at all. So basically, it needs to go back to 1 pixel for it to look correct. But basically, because I have this method that can create perfect looking HTML tables, and you might wonder, how did I learn to do all this? Well, I watched a LinkedIn learning course about HTML, and she covered the lady doing it covered some things about HTML and a little bit of CSS to style things. And so I was watching LinkedIn Learning, I watched some videos, I figured out a few methods, and I basically have a method that works. And I could stop there, but I'm just going to regenerate everything there, make sure it's all correct. Okay, and it's perfectly styled. So you see all the document is there. We can view the source. We see all the perfectly written HTML that I wrote myself or was generated by Pandoc from the Markdown that I wrote myself. So it all works really well. But I'm going to show you something kind of interesting. So if we were to open the Chessbase table.md, we're going to open this with Notepad. We're going to open this with Notepad. Here's what it looks like in Notepad++. Has some syntax highlighting. Then I'm going to open Joplin. Now Joplin is probably one of my favorite Markdown editors. And I'm going to show you something cool about Joplin that doesn't apply to any other Markdown editor I've ever used before. So I'm going to show you something is very special here. So once it loads up, so Joplin is loading here. So let's just go to all notes. So we're going to yeah, that was my book that I wrote there. We're going to just create a brand new note here, and here we're going to paste all of that. Now notice something. I just copy and pasted the Markdown here. You see the plain text format? But on the right side, you can see that it created these perfect looking square cells for a table here. So it creates perfect square cells for a table there automatically in Joplin. Now, as cool as that is, there's only one problem. I have no control over the formatting. It looks good, it looks perfectly aligned, but I still can't control the exact formatting. How big are the letters? How big do I want the table and each square to be? So I don't really have much control over it. But just for the sake of showing that Joplin does at least let you make these tables like this, I highly recommend it, because if you don't want to write all your custom HTML and CSS with a make file and run commands like I do to make my tables, you could use Joplin as sort of a basic workaround to make basic tables. You may not have full control, but it certainly works for representing chess or similar games, because it would work for shogi as well, as long as you have a representation for every piece in shogi using a single letter. So, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to see, is it possible to export, okay, I want to export a PDF file. I'm just going to export a PDF file of this note here. Okay, so I'm going to close Joplin, going to close all that. We're going to go to the downloads. And then, let's see. Interestingly, the PDF doesn't look identical. Notice that the cells are wider in the PDF there than they were in the original thing. So it's not a one-to-one comparison. Also, when you're exporting a PDF with Joplin, you don't have the ability to make each a position or heading start on a new page. Now, I have explained how to do that before in a book that I just published, Minimal Markdown for Authors, but that's outside of the scope of this video. There's a whole process. You can do that in LibreOffice or Microsoft Word. But anyway, I've been having fun experimenting with HTML tables, learning HTML, CSS, Markdown, all of the tricks, because I'm a writer and I'm trying to look for a system that allows me to represent pieces on a chessboard with, you know, a reasonable representation of what the chessboard looks like. But I'm trying to avoid the use of having to use images all the time. I'm trying to find a more efficient way that works for me faster, but I can always go back to images if necessary, like I did for my book, Chastity's Chess Chapters. Anyway, I know that's a lot of information. Most people don't care about this video. I'm just sharing some technical details here. I'm going to close all that, so if you actually listen to my nerdy explanation of how I make chessboards with HTML tables in style with CSS, then good for you. Thanks for watching. Unfortunately, this is mostly for myself to remind myself how I did this, but it's very impressive that it works at all.